What if the woman sitting in the front row of your church every Sunday, the one smiling beside your pastor, greeting members at the door, praying with the women's fellowship, what if she was not who any of you thought she was? What if behind the modest church clothes and the carefully practiced smile, she was living a completely different life, a life with different men, different phone numbers, different versions of herself that her husband, a man of God, a man who preached truth every single Sunday, never once suspected existed? What if the children he was raising, the ones he dedicated to God at the altar of his own church, the ones he stayed up late praying over, were not his? This is not a hypothetical. This is the true story of Pastor Emmanuel Okafor and his wife, Vivian. And before this story is over, you will understand why the most dangerous secrets are not the ones kept by strangers. They are the ones kept by the person sleeping beside you. Vivian is good at this, remarkably good. She knows exactly how much to show and exactly how much to hide. She knows when to hold Emmanuel's hand during Sunday service and when to slip her second phone into her handbag before he comes home. She knows which lies are small enough to be believed and which truths are large enough to bury. She has been doing this for 6 years. And Pastor Emmanuel, brilliant, devoted, respected Emmanuel, has had no idea. But here is what is interesting. Here is the part that will stay with you long after this story ends. Vivian did not hide everything perfectly. There were signs. There were moments where the mask slipped just slightly, where something did not quite add up, or a door was closed a little too quickly, or an explanation came a little too smoothly. People around Emmanuel saw these moments. They pointed at them. They begged him to look. He chose not to. And that choice, that single, sustained, faithful, stubborn choice, is what made everything that follows possible. To understand Vivian, you have to understand what Emmanuel was when she met him. He is 36 years old, founding pastor of Grace Covenant Church in the Woji district of Port Harcourt. The church is not small, 400 members, a proper building, a reputation that has spread through the city quietly but steadily the way good reputations do. Emmanuel is the kind of pastor people drive across town for. His sermons are not loud or theatrical, they are precise. He has a way of saying true things in simple language that makes people feel seen. And in a city as complicated and restless as Port Harcourt, that is a rare and valuable gift. He is also lonely in a way he does not discuss with anyone. He sees Vivian for the first time on a Wednesday evening outside the church gate. She is waiting for a friend, wearing a yellow dress, laughing at something on her phone. Emmanuel is carrying a stack of programs for the upcoming revival, and he walks past her and then stops walking entirely for reasons he cannot immediately explain. She is stunning. That's the honest word for it. He goes home that night and prays. He prays the next morning too. By the end of the week, the prayers have shifted from, "Lord, help me focus," to something that sounds much more like, "Lord, is this the one?" And Emmanuel is smart enough to recognize the difference, but too far gone to care. He finds out her name through a mutual contact, Vivian Chuku, 28, works in marketing for a telecommunications company, comes to Grace Covenant occasionally, but is not a committed member. He invites her to the church's upcoming women's conference, not as a romantic gesture, he tells himself, but as pastoral outreach. She comes. She sits in the second row, laughs at his illustrations during the teaching session, and afterward tells him it was the most honest thing she has heard in a church in years. Emmanuel shakes her hand and walks away feeling something he has not felt in a long time: alive. Within 4 months, he is telling Elder Boniface that God has shown him his wife. Elder Boniface, 63 years old, quiet, perceptive, the kind of man who has sat in enough church board meetings to know when spiritual language is being used to dress up human desire, listens to Emmanuel with his hands folded and his face carefully neutral. He says, "Pastor, I hear you, but I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer me honestly, not as my pastor, but as my son." He pauses. Have you prayed about her character? Not her potential, not what you believe God can do in her character as she is today. Emmanuel tells him yes, he has prayed extensively. What he does not tell Elder Boniface is that every time he prays about Vivian's character, he opens his eyes before the answer fully forms. He's not ready to hear something that might require him to walk away from the yellow dress and the laugh and the feeling of being alive again. Sister Nongozi is less gentle. She sits across from Emmanuel 3 weeks before the wedding and places a printed photograph on his desk without a word. It's a picture from social media, Vivian at a nightclub, drink in hand, arm around a man whose face is slightly turned from the camera. She says, "I'm not judging her, I'm protecting you." Emmanuel looks at the photograph for a long moment, then slides it back across the desk. He says, "People change, that's the entire gospel." Sister Nogozi picks up the photograph, folds it once, and puts it in her bag. She stands to leave and then turns at the door. "Yes, Pastor," she says quietly. "People change, but not everyone is changing." She leaves. Emmanuel sits alone in his office, and somewhere across Port Harcourt, Vivian is on her second phone, laughing, making plans that have nothing to do with Sunday morning. The wedding happens 3 weeks later. It is beautiful. Emmanuel cries at the altar. Nobody there knows yet that the most important person at that wedding is keeping a secret that will one day bring the entire church to its knees. The first year of the marriage is manageable. Vivian makes an effort, the kind of effort that looks genuine from a distance, but feels slightly rehearsed up close. She dresses conservatively for Sunday services. She sits beside Emmanuel at the front of the church. She learns the names of key members and uses them correctly, which impresses people more than she realizes. The congregation begins to accept her the way you accept whether you did not choose, not with enthusiasm, but with the quiet resignation of people who trust their pastor. But by the second year, the effort starts costing her more than she is willing to pay. She stops attending midweek Bible study, then women's fellowship, then some Sunday mornings she simply is not there, and Emmanuel stands at the pulpit and tells the congregation she is not feeling well, and Sister Ngozi watches him from the third pew with an expression that says everything she has promised herself she will no longer say out loud. The complaints come slowly at first, then all at once. A deacon mentions quietly that Vivian was seen at a nightclub on Victoria Island during a ministers' conference weekend. This same weekend, she told Emmanuel she was visiting her mother in Aba. Emmanuel confronts her. She cries. She explains it was a work function, that a colleague had dragged her there, that she left early and felt terrible about it. She's so convincing, so specific with her details, so wounded by the suggestion that she would lie, that Emmanuel apologizes before the conversation is over. That is the thing about Vivian. She never defends herself with anger. She defends herself with pain. And Emmanuel, who has built his entire ministry on the theology of compassion, does not know how to push past a woman's tears without feeling like a monster. So he stops pushing. And Vivian learns this about him, files it away, uses it. By the third year, 2 things happen that Emmanuel believes are the greatest blessings of his life. Vivian falls pregnant, then 18 months later, she falls pregnant again. He names the first child Tobias. The second, a girl, he names Adaize. He dedicates both children at the Grace Covenant altar, weeping openly both times, telling his congregation that God is faithful and that family is the first church a man will ever lead. The congregation cheers. They photograph the dedications. They post them online. Nobody in that building, not one single person, knows what Vivian knows in those moments, what she carries silently behind her smile as Emmanuel lifts each child toward heaven and thanks God for them. She knows who their fathers are, and it is not the man holding them. Tobias is 3 years old when Darius appears. He does not come quietly. He does not write a letter or request a private meeting or show the basic courtesy of discretion. He walks into Grace Covenant Church on a Sunday morning during the offering, stands at the back of the 400-seat sanctuary and waits. When Emmanuel steps to the pulpit to begin his sermon, Darius raises his voice above the settling congregation and speaks. "Pastor Okafor." His voice is steady, controlled, the voice of a man who has rehearsed this moment many times. "I need you to know the truth about your wife." The silence that follows is the kind that has weight. You can feel it pressing against the walls. Emmanuel looks at this man, mid-30s, well-dressed, jaw set with the particular tension of someone who has been carrying something heavy for too long and has finally decided to put it down regardless of where it lands. "Brother," Emmanuel says carefully, "this is not the place. Tobias is my son." Darius says it simply. No drama, no trembling, just the flat, devastating delivery of a fact. "I have been trying to reach you privately for 4 months. You did not respond, so I am here." 400 people turned toward the back of the church simultaneously, like sunflowers turn toward light. Except there's nothing warm about this moment. There is only the sound of Vivian, seated in the front row, making a small noise that is not quite a word and not quite a cry, something in between. Something that, to the people sitting close enough to hear it, sounds uncomfortably like confirmation. Emmanuel does not look at her. Not yet. He keeps his eyes on Darius and grips the pulpit with both hands and becomes very, very still. The service ends without a sermon. The DNA results arrive on a Thursday. Emmanuel sits alone in his church office and opens the envelope with the same hands that have opened Bibles in this room for 11 years. He reads the document once. Then he sets it flat on the desk and stares at the wall for a long time. Tobias is not his. He already knew this, somewhere beneath the hope and the denial and the desperate prayers of the past 3 weeks. But knowing a thing and having it confirmed on paper are two entirely different experiences. And Emmanuel discovers this difference now, in a way that rearranges something fundamental inside him. He requests a second test for Adaize. Those results arrive 6 days later. Adaize is not his either. Her biological father, it eventually emerges through Vivian's own broken confession, is a banker she met at a corporate event in her second year of marriage, a man Emmanuel has never heard of, a man who doesn't even know he has a daughter. The news does not stay private. It never does in a city like Port Harcourt, where everyone knows someone who was sitting in Grace Covenant Church that Sunday morning. Within 2 weeks, the story has spread through the city's church community like fire through Harmattan grass. Fast, thorough, leaving very little standing. Members begin to leave Grace Covenant quietly. Then, not so quietly. The midweek service dropped by half. Offerings fell. 2 associate pastors requested transfers to other ministries. The church that Emmanuel built with 11 years of sacrifice began to feel like a building that is still standing out of habit. Emmanuel files for divorce. He does it without anger, which surprises people. He does it with measured, exhausted calm of a man who has already done all his grieving in private. He makes one public statement to his congregation, not a sermon, just a statement delivered from the pulpit on a quiet Sunday morning with no music and no preamble. "I owe you the truth," he says. "It was not God who told me to marry Vivian. It was my own voice. I dressed my desires in the language of revelation and I called it faith. And I ignored every wise person God placed in my path to protect me. That failure is mine and I am sorry." The church is silent. "Do not be like me," he continues. "Do not claim to hear from God when you are only hearing your own desires. A beautiful face is not the same as a beautiful character. The choices you make today will shape everything that comes after." He steps down as senior pastor 3 months later. But Emmanuel Okafor does not disappear. He takes 6 months away. He rests. He sits with Elder Boniface, who never once said, "I told you so." And that restraint heals something in Emmanuel that 1,000 apologies could not touch. He maintains a gentle, consistent relationship with Tobias and Adaize because whatever their origins, they are innocent, and he refuses to let them carry the weight of their mother's choices. Then, quietly, he starts again. He calls it Broken Vessels Ministry. It meets on Friday evenings in a rented room in Rumo-Okula, the same area where Grace Covenant once held its first services, and it is built specifically for people who have been through things that feel too unsurvivable. Failed marriages, public shame, shattered faith, the kinds of wounds that make people feel too dirty for ordinary church. The room fills up faster than Emmanuel expects, because it turns out Port Harcourt is full of broken vessels, and they have been waiting a long time for someone honest enough to stand before them and say, "I am one too." What part of this story hit you the hardest? Was it the moment in the church, the DNA results, or Emmanuel's final words from the pulpit? Tell me in the comments. I genuinely want to know. A final word. There is something this story keeps asking us long after it ends. It asks us to be honest, not just with the people around us, but with ourselves. Pastor Emmanuel was not a bad man. He was a human one. He let longing dress itself up as leading, and he paid a price that no one should have to pay. But here is the grace in it. He did not let that price be the final word. He rose, humbled, honest, and more useful to broken people than he ever was on a polished pulpit. If you are carrying a decision you know in your spirit is driven more by want than by wisdom, this story is your pause. Choose character, choose counsel, choose truth, even when truth is the harder, quieter, less exciting option. You will thank yourself later. If this story moved you, please like, subscribe, and share it with your friends. And tell us in the comments section where you are watching from.